Is it Doge or Doge?
Think it's DOGE.
Okay, I'm going to try to say Doge.
We ask the really hard questions.
Doge, if you are listening, Taxplaining, or Ashley and I here, propose a novel czar for you. Ashley wrote this on LinkedIn proposing an ERC Interest Czar. I'm going to ask her to please read the first couple of lines of that. But Doge, if you are listening, this is necessary and it is wholly aligned with your goals of cost savings and regulatory rescission, administrative reduction. So please seriously take a listen to what Ashley is about to propose now.
Okay. I said I would love for DOGE to appoint an ERC Interest Czar. That's a mouthful. I know one firm whose clients have seen $5.6 million in interest alone paid by the IRS on ERC claims since October of 22. And this is with this latest tranche of claims that the IRS has released starting, I think it started in October. So in a lot of these, the interest that the taxpayer is receiving has actually ended up covering the amount that they paid to have their credit calculated and claimed. My point was kind of the irony in delaying further. I say irony because the IRS is citing reasons such as waste and fraud and abuse. By delaying this so much further, they have created this situation where the average taxpayer that doesn't even own a business and may not even know what ERC is basically footing the bill for businesses that claim the credit that it turns out are eligible.
And just briefly, let's pretend Doge has no idea what the employee retention credit is. What would you say about that?
The ERC, the Employee Retention Credit, is a pandemic era tax credit enacted by Congress in March of 2020 to reward eligible businesses for keeping employees on the payroll despite the hardships they were experiencing during the pandemic. And the administration of the ERC, we have seen it evolve from the IRS making a decent effort in the beginning to get taxpayers their money. And then as time went on and the credit was enhanced and expanded to allow more businesses to qualify for higher dollar amounts, essentially, which also speaks to Congress's intent with this credit, we saw the IRS change their tune from cooperating with what Congress had mandated when they enacted the law to saying things like 95% of claims were fraudulent, which turns out was based on anecdotal evidence, and just outright refusing to pay for over a year. And now the way that it's being administered, nothing has improved. In fact, it's gotten worse. And practitioners are even seeing appeals treat things differently when it's an ERC claim and not follow the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And the so-called Independent Office of Appeals is apparently not independent when it comes to ERC, is what we're hearing from very reputable practitioners who have practiced in the tax controversy space for many years. The result of all of this waste and delay and misstatements about the credit and who qualifies have led to potentially billions in interest being owed to these business owners that are still waiting for their credits at the expense of the average American taxpayer who also went through a pandemic and is suffering and dealing with things on an unprecedented level. So something has to change.
I love your idea of an ERC interest czar, but I think the need is much greater than that. The interest that's piling up on ERC claims is not simply a metric at this point. It is a clear indicator of systemic inefficiencies that has to be addressed urgently.
Absolutely.
And we may well have this DOGE vehicle to address that. And I think you're right. I think we need a czar, someone able to police some much needed reform and implement that. I think this interest as a metric for IRS systemic inefficiencies
Mhm.
is more broadly applicable. I mean, it could be any tax credit, it could be
Every
anytime
time.
there's a relief measure needed. I mean, what happened with the ERC should never happen again. We'll all realize that the real danger here has been the IRS wasting taxpayer dollars with the interest payouts on ERC claims. The IRS hinged everything on this, I think, made up or exaggerated, clearly exaggerated. 95% are fraudulent. Well, that's not right, but we know for a fact that 100% of the claims stuck in the moratorium are racking up interest. Okay, so that's the number we know is causing great harm. And again, I think it's in the billions. I think I'll be
I
right about
agree.
that.
Yeah, and my thought with that too, yes, it was tongue in cheek, but it I do think it's a good idea. I
It's a
agree. And
great idea, Ashley.
I think it has to be somebody who's familiar with the industry from the taxpayer side and from the practitioner side.
What do you see a day in the life of a interest czar or IRS administrative czar? Now I'm not sure what to call them, but what does it look like?
Yeah, so I think first of all, it's sort of a triage situation where you have to stop the bleeding first and foremost because every day this interest is compounding.
So
But
expedited resolution is first, right?
expedited resolution is first. You have to look then at the IRS's systems and processes, identify inefficiencies. For example, this called AI that they use
Yeah.
to come up with these disallowance letters, most of which have been completely inaccurate based on either false information, no information, or information the IRS wouldn't even have available. So looking at how they're currently handling these claims, how they're determining who gets the disallowance letter, how they're determining who gets audited, what are the red flags? Are they even looking at industry codes? What are they looking at? And are there ways, and I know the answer to this, are there ways they can be more efficient? And not just be more efficient, but accurate. And so I think there has to be a balance of efficiency and accuracy, and it's attainable. I mean, I know all things are easier said than done, but it has to be somebody who's not just a government mouthpiece or career federal employee. No offense to any of you out there. I know there are great people that work for the government, but to step back and see things, if I'm a business owner, how would I approach this to be efficient and accurate and do a good job and live up to the part of the name that is service, Internal Revenue Service? I mean, that's always been a joke, an oxymoron. But I think it can be fixed. I think it just is going to take the right person and looking at the right data points and coming up with new ideas.
I think it'll take a person who can make some pretty tough calls though right now.
Yeah.
And one of the toughest, let's say I came in as czar today. Unfortunately, the IRS has put us in such a precarious position with, I believe, billions now of interest unnecessarily, that there is great harm to paying out all of that to businesses, frankly. I mean, where is our reserve? If we confront another pandemic, another catastrophe, and businesses need a lifeline, how much money is out there to help?
Yeah.
I can't imagine that allowing the IRS to rack up this amount of interest. It's got to stop. And
Mhm.
so, as much as it's not fair in my mind to ask businesses that survive to sacrifice the interest they're owed rightfully, I imagine a czar would at least have to give that serious thought at this point. I think they would be confronted with a very difficult decision in that they would have to say, look, is the harm greater now if we pay out all
Yeah.
of this catastrophic interest amount that the IRS is at fault for? Or Or is it better to find some sort of ground where, I don't know, do you start cutting the amount now, asking them to give up some of the amount? Is there maybe a metric where if your business is not on the brink of shutting down, you give up all of your interest owed to you? There is a huge amount that will be going out to some businesses that thankfully survive, thankfully are going well. There are tough decisions to be made there. Somebody has to come in with a fresh set of eyes, strongly advocating for business, strongly advocating for taxpayers, independent of the IRS and their mess of a job.
The small business owner, in the case of ERC, has gotten slap in the face after slap in the face. And it would just, I don't think it would go over well if we killed interest. And I agree with you. It has to really be a balanced approach and look at, from the government standpoint, we're in a budget crisis.
Yeah.
And we can't really afford to pay out all of this interest. So what do you do there? The other thing I want to mention quickly is that the problem has been misidentified. And then that has just spiraled and festered and grown into this ridiculous situation that we're talking about. The fraudsters who do exist, and many of whom have never even been held accountable, were used as the scapegoat to merely delay indefinitely. We've lost out on so much valuable time where someone could have been looking, identify the actual problem, and come up with some solutions and implement those before we got to this point. And instead, that has just festered and grown into now you have Congress members speaking to the press and just parroting the same things the commissioner has been saying since March of 2023. And it's like, we're almost in 2025. This beast of ERC has turned into something totally different than what it was then. And so much could have been done differently. And I don't want to keep harping on the past, but I think you have to look at that to figure out, how did we get here? What can we do to fix it?
Going forward, a czar has to make sure that lessons learned are applied so that we're not in a mess like this again. They have to be reflective, and that has to be in the front of their minds, because one of the big lessons here is the IRS needs to be more cognizant of interest generally when they make decisions. The knee-jerk reaction of let's impose a moratorium and freeze everyone's ERC refund because we're afraid of fraud, that resulted in the mess we're in. And they didn't factor in interest. This is going to be historically catastrophic for us.
Well, and are we able to use profanity?
Insert expletive.
My point about identifying the problem and the problem having been misidentified, the reason that is so profound is the ERC has been a topic that has been put up for vote before Congress. We had the ERC killer bill that went through the House, passed, and it failed in the Senate. And now there's this new bill going around. None of this mentions interest. No one is talking about interest. They're talking about what the savings would be, allegedly, if they cut off ERC early, which is not even accurate. Nobody is even talking about the actual numbers or mentioning interest in any of these conversations so that we can solve the problem.
Yeah, we definitely need an interest czar. So I think a good call to action for the audience is email DOGE. I think we have the email, right, Ashley? What's the email?
Yes, I think we do.
I would say email them and nominate Taxplaining. Ashley and I will happily be co-czars.
I would love to. I believe the email is doge@mail.house.gov. I think people can probably do a quick Google search and confirm that. And yeah, I think everyone needs to be talking about this. This is something that's, in hindsight, going to be a big blow when these numbers actually come out.
Yeah. Great insight today. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.